Excellent. So hi, everyone. Welcome to our Family Day live webinar. We're live here at the museum up in the galleries, and Chris is live. He's in the building right beside me, and he's going to talk to us about what's in our collections. Before we do that, though,
you're assuming I'm live, Kim. Maybe this is just an elaborate recording.
A very rehearsed recording where I've timed everything perfectly. Oh, hey, that's not what I want to share. Stop sharing that. I'm going to try to share one more time my PowerPoint. Yay. This is how you know it's live, because I'm making mistakes. There we go. Family scenes, behind the scenes tours. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are here on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations. Their families have been here since time immemorial, and their future generations will continue to care for this place and this land, and I'm very grateful for that. Today we're looking behind the scenes, and we're wondering, where do you keep everything? Where is all of this, these belongings, these artifacts, these specimens at the Royal BC Museum? So if you're watching us on Facebook, you can type any questions you have on the chat there. If you're watching on Zoom, if you're joining us live online, you can use the chat. And for the people here with me in the room, you can just call out or put up your hand and I'll ask the question on your behalf. For those who are joining us online, here we are in British Columbia on the south tip of Vancouver Island. And if you were standing in Victoria looking at our building, this is what we look like. And it's kind of gray and cloudy today, just like this picture is. So that's what it looks like here. And actually,
Kim, if you stay on that picture for a second.
I stopped sharing already. But I'll bring it back.
Yeah, can you bring it back?
Oh yeah, because we'll show the tower where you are.
Yeah. You could point out where you are, and then you can point out where I am.
So if you can see my little cursor, here's the front door. I am sitting right in the window over on this side. Chris,
where are the galleries?
Oh yeah, good question. The galleries are this building on what's on the left side of my screen. I'm over here near the front, and Chris is in this building, but not up top. He's down, about here, where my cursor is under the ground. So we're lucky that you're coming through, Chris.
Yeah, I know, because I'm literally underground, and you have to go through a tunnel to get to where I am now. So thank you, Kim. Hi, everyone. So this is the third of 3 tours that we're doing today for Family Day. The first tour was in the basement, but the other side of the museum, looking at our exhibit arts area. And then for the second tour, we went behind the scenes in the galleries. And now we're in the collection tower. And Kim was asking, where do we keep everything? It's also helpful to know how many things we have. So often we say that we have about 7 million objects, and specimens, and belongings. Only a very small part of that is out in the galleries at any one time. Most of it is behind the scenes, and most of it is in this collection tower, some in warehouse spaces around the city as well, but most is in this collection tower. And you might say, well, then who goes in that collection tower? Staff come back here, but also researchers as well, because in this collection tower, there's so many objects, specimens, belongings. It's really important that community members or researchers or people that want to look at these things more closely can have access to them. So they'll come into the collection tower. But for today, I'm just coming to you through this digital tour. And right now we're in the basement. And one of the things about the collections is some things are really, really heavy. And in this area, you might see behind me that there are all these jars. And in these jars it's liquid, usually ethanol. And that's to preserve the specimen. And I'll show you one just that I have right beside me here. So this is an example of a jar with solution to preserve the specimen that's in here. And the thing is, with lots of different jars, with all that liquid, it could get really, really heavy. So it's important that the really heavy things in the museum are in the basement. A lot of our paleontology, so the fossils and other things that are in rock, those are also in the basement too, because it's really important that heavy things are in the basement. Just makes it more safe to have heavy things at the bottom of this tower.
And Chris, I'm reminded by seeing things in jars, this type of collection is called a wet collection. Is that right?
It is called a wet. It's called a wet collection. That's right. And this particular collection in the basement here is mostly the invertebrate zoology collection. So it's all the things, or most of the things in BC. So the Royal BC Museum is a natural and human history museum. So it's a museum that looks at the entire province of British Columbia through objects and belongings, and through working with community to better understand different communities around the province. But sometimes that's through the actual, like with natural history, it's through the specimens. And this is the invertebrate zoology collection. So it's all the things that don't have backbones, but that are not insects, because insects are its own collection. So a lot of the things in here are marine invertebrates. So things that are in water of some kind that don't have backbones. And maybe you just sort of think about, yeah, go ahead, Kim.
Yeah, this comes from a question who's joining us on Zoom.
Yeah, for sure.
And this attendee, and I think it just fits really well with where you are in terms of like who's doing this work. And can you talk a little bit about what cataloging is done? Do these specimens get replaced or updated or even exchanged with other museums?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that I showed you is actually from Virginia in the United States. So we would typically not collect that kind of specimen if it's not from British Columbia. And we might reach out to maybe a museum in Virginia and see if they would want that. And we have researchers that go out and actively collect in all of our collections, that actively work with communities or working in particular areas of the province to do active collecting, to build the collection. And we have curators and collection managers that do this work. Primarily the curators, but also collection managers are part of that process as well. And then when things come into the collection, this growing collection, then we also need to maintain that collection. And that's the collection manager's job, is to really understand where everything is, to properly catalog it, put the right numbers on it, know where things are on the shelves. So that's a really important process, because if a researcher comes in and says, I want to look at this particular shark, say, or this particular octopus, then we need to know exactly where that is to be able to find it. And these collection managers are taking care of hundreds of thousands of things. So it takes a lot of care and a lot of focus to be able to do that kind of work and do it well.
We have a collection manager a former collection manager who called herself a librarian of dead things.
Oh,
so
yeah.
like a librarian, keeping track of everything, cataloging it, knowing where it is, making sure it's there, it's in good shape.
So we have things that are very, very large.
Oh, there, we're losing you a bit, Chris.
Like whales.
Oh.
And for example, and we'll look at a skull of a whale in a second. Oh no! Oh, maybe I'll step back.
Back towards that door is a little better, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so we have very large things, we have very small things, especially in the invertebrate collection. We can have something as small as a tardigrade that could fit on my finger, or something as large as a Humboldt squid or a giant octopus. And in this vat here, I was trying to get close enough to be able to open it, but I don't know if I might cut out if I do that, but I'll try to open it, see if this works. So a big vat like this has lots of squid in it. And if you were here with me, you would smell the ethanol. It's 70% ethanol. Oh, it's very stinky. To preserve these these huge squid that are in here.
And if you were here with me, Chris, you would have seen some faces where the mouth went open really big, because that's
Oh yeah,
those are big squid. Those are surprising.
yeah. And sometimes when these are deep freezers, and can anyone see how cold these freezers are? Can you see that?
Yeah, that's very clear. It says -80 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, so think about the coldest it gets in Antarctica is how cold these freezers are. And it's called a deep freeze. To freeze, maybe it's some little part of an animal. It could be a skin, like a tissue sample or like a blood specimen. So we can keep a little portion of an animal, and then it doesn't need to come, the whole thing doesn't need to come into the museum. To get the, yeah.
We have a question for you. Just finish that thought and then we'll ask our question.
Yeah, so there's just, I was just saying, there's different ways to collect. It might be the whole animal, it might just be a part of the animal.
Okay, here's a question.
What's your question? Yeah.
How many staff manage these collections, these various collections? The question is, how many staff manage the collections?
That's a great question. So for example, in this invertebrate collection, we have one collection manager and we have one curator. And then often and that's the case with most of the collections, we have typically one collection manager and one curator. And in addition to that, then there's also different researchers, sometimes students doing work study. So there are usually some other people helping out, sometimes volunteers help out. But in terms of staff that are specifically dedicated to a collection, it's usually one collection manager and one curator.
Follow up to that.
So for example, this collection, the invertebrate collection, Dr. Henry Chung is the curator, and Hugh McIntosh is the collection manager, and they do incredible work just to take care of this collection. So I'm going to go into this other room and let me know if I'm cutting out, Kim. Is it okay?
You're okay right now.
Okay, great. So we have these big shelves that are pretty fancy. You usually don't see shelves like this. You'll notice that there are these little triangle shaped things. So if I unlock it and then I turn, oops. Let me try this one. And I turn it, then the whole shelf can move. Here, I'll try to turn it enough that it starts moving on its own.
So it would take up too much room otherwise.
That way, we could fit to have these special kind of shelves that let us have a little bit more space. Because remember, I said hundreds of thousands of specimens. So we'll go down one of these hallways here in these aisles, and I wanted to show you this one specimen. So this is. Does anyone guess what this is? Does it look familiar at all? Is there anything that makes you think, oh, that kind of looks like a...
We're getting some crab vibes. Is it a crab?
Yeah, there are definitely crab vibes. And you might notice on the top of the crab there is a particular kind of shape. Does anyone see that shape?
Right away, we've got a heart crab.
That's right. Yeah, this is a heart crab. Yeah, well done. So this is a heart crab. And with any specimen that we have in the collection, it's really beautiful, all the different shapes and all the different like textures on this heart crab.
And Chris, I noticed there's some information on that tag you're showing us. What is the year? Can you tell us something like, what is that telling us?
It's really important whenever we have a specimen like this, is that we have all the important, Yeah, yeah. So that's what I was just about to say. So this tag shows all the important dates, all the important data. So it shows where it was found. I can't pronounce papilosis. And it was found or collected on Arbutus Island, which is just north of Sydney, here on Vancouver Island. It has all the exact coordinates of where it was found. And then it was collected by B. Cook and A. Peden on April 13th, 1973. And
Almost 50 years ago.
2 weeks later, it was identified. Yeah, almost.
And Chris, if you can hear me, you're cutting out quite a bit in this room, so we'll get you
And
to
then it
move
was,
on.
so it's probably collected in the field and identified. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I do hear you. You're just choppy.
Oh, okay. Because I promised that I would show a vampire squid. So I'll just quickly.
Okay.
This is our vampire squid. Ooh, vampire squid.
You know how vampires, they don't have a reflection? This squid is sort of is making itself hard to see as well.
Oh,
So
yeah, right.
yeah.
So just
I have a question here, Chris. Just one second.
For sure. Yeah.
In the wet collection, how do you do especially done to protect?
Is there any special earthquake precautions with that shelving or in terms of the collection, Chris?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something they consider a lot of how to make sure that everything is safe. They make sure that all the jars are in containers. So if there is some shaking that happens, that it wouldn't fall off the shelf. So they're all, sorry, just turn around. Oops. They're all in these containers, and everything is locked down so that it won't fall over. If there's a big earthquake, it might, but we try to have it be as secure as possible. And they try not to go as high as this. This is probably the highest it would go, just for safety that way as well. But they're constantly thinking of how to make it as safe as possible. Right behind me, can you still hear me, Kim?
Yes, we can.
Okay, right behind is, in each collection, there's a type specimen collection. So that's the first of anything that was found. So maybe the very first vampire squid that was found in BC would go in the type collection. So they're particularly valuable and particularly important. So this shelving is a special kind of shelving that actually, if there was a fire, say, that this would be protected if there was a fire, or if there's any other kind of natural disaster. This is designed to protect in an extra special way. So, but yeah, so that's a really great question. They're constantly thinking about how best to protect things in case of emergency. So, because we are looking after all of these things, it's our responsibility to protect them too. So
now, Chris, you showed us a jar with a lid and it had the name of the collectors on it. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how things come to the collection? What are the different ways?
Sure, and I'm just going to make my way up the staircase because we're going to go up to the 7th floor. So just let me know if I'm cutting out at all. So yeah, the collections come in lots of different ways. Some come in by donations. People maybe have made their own collection and they want to donate it to the museum. And as long as there's enough data that shows where it was found and how it was collected, that's usually what's important. Sometimes that the collections come in through fieldwork by collection managers and curators. We'll go out and do some collecting. And that's helpful, especially if there's specific gaps or specific things that the curators and collection managers want to make sure is represented within the collections. And then we also work with other organizations like Department of Fisheries and Oceans, if they're doing some work and they are doing some collecting, then maybe, or they have something that during their time out that they get, then maybe they would donate it to the museum. So there's many different ways that they come into the museum.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to give you a moment to breathe because I realize you're walking up 8 flights of stairs there. You get from the basement to the 7th floor.
And talking at the same time.
And talking. So I'll take this next question. It's from a Zoom attendee. They're asking if we know what the oldest specimen is or what the museum first acquired. I don't know from the top of my head what our oldest specimen is in terms of when it was acquired, but the museum has been collecting since 1866. And that was largely our natural history collection that began at that time. And in terms of newest or most recent, fieldwork is taking place, I believe, as we speak, or even just recently, Henry Chin was doing fieldwork. So new could be happening quite often. In the summertime, the newest thing could be a daily update in terms of what's happening new. Chris,
actually, Henry is going to the Galapagos Islands right now as part of his fieldwork.
Yes.
So usually we would just collect things in BC, but sometimes if there's a particular reason, sometimes it makes sense to collect. That field work is more about knowledge gathering rather than collecting, but yeah, so there's, in addition to the collection, there's research that's happening with curators and collection managers to better understand.
There's another question here on Zoom that I can answer as you let you just take a pause there. The question is about if the public can submit requests for exhibitions. Like, how can you see more of these things that are in our collection? We did do an exhibit probably about 10 years ago, maybe, called Behind the Scenes, where we did bring out things from all of our different areas in the museum, and they were on an exhibit. But we do have an exhibition committee that does review requests and submissions. So we get submissions from other museums. There's traveling companies that have shows that they travel around that, for example, like Wildlife Photographer of the Year is from the Museum of Natural History in London, England. But we also get emails to our information line or our reception desk for people asking or suggesting topics they're interested in. So at any time, people can make those kinds of requests, and that information goes through the committee who reviews and finds matches and opportunities.
And just to say that Kim is on the exhibitions committee, so you want to get on her good side if you're gonna. Just kidding.
Yeah,
but the
committee rotates, so there's different positions and opportunities.
Yeah. And it's interdepartmental too, so that there's curators and learning staff and exhibit folks. To create an exhibition takes a lot of different voices, a lot of different perspectives within the museum and beyond the museum too. So we're now up on the 7th floor. So the museum collections tower actually it goes up 14 floors, but there's not a 13th floor because I think it's bad luck, I think. So it goes from the 12th floor to the 14th floor, and then there's the basement. And most of the floors are filled with collection items. And all the way up to the 7th floor, it's mostly natural history specimens. And then above the 7th floor, it's mostly human history, objects and belongings. This floor is a little bit of both. And that's why I wanted to bring you to this floor. So you'll see there's some history collections. And I was noticing earlier that there's this sign So this was donated to us. And it says, grow a beard, less plastic, less electricity. So this was collected during a climate action gathering. So it was a sign that someone made for that climate action event. And we actually collected many different signs from that particular one in Victoria. So we're with these collections, we're trying to sort of get a sense of a moment in time. We also had a big orcas exhibition as well. So these are some of the objects that were part of the orcas exhibition.
Okay.
Like Luna, yeah. And then if we go a little bit further and see that there's lots of other different kinds of collection items. This is just a small little portion of that. Most of the history collection, the non-Indigenous history collection, is on floors 8 and 9. And most of the Indigenous collection and belongings are on floors 11 to 14. So just to end this tour, I just wanted to show you this little corridor here. There's some really interesting things that at least I find really interesting, like this big phonograph. Look how big that is. Beautiful. And then right below here, there are some ballot boxes. So these are used as ballot boxes. You have that little opening there. Kim, because you did a whole outreach kit around ballot boxes.
Yeah, I was gonna say that ballot box is familiar. So part of the way we share our collections is through outreach materials. So we have outreach boxes that can go to schools anywhere in the province. And we have one about voting and democracy in British Columbia. And all of the materials and supplies are in a reproduction of that exact box. That's a 1917 ballot box. So women had just recently gotten the vote by the time that ballot box was being used. And yeah, so we made a reproduction of it. So that actual box itself is not being put at any risk at all, but you can still learn from it and see what it was like. There's some more.
Yeah, there's another one. So what another important thing is that we don't want to just have one ballot box. We want to see what are some of the different designs, what's the history behind the use of this particular ballot box, like who used it, how many different election cycles. So when we're looking at objects like this, it's really important to understand the use and how it was used.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Chris, I see we're wrapping up here, but we have a great question to wrap up with.
Can I show you just one? Can I show you just one more thing?
Sure.
So this is that magic lantern. And if you're with Kim in the galleries right now, we have a little replica of a magic lantern. But this is magic lantern, which would have slides. And this slide is actually of a beehive and little bees. And you'll notice that there's this little crank. And when you crank that, the bees fly around. So this slide goes into the machine. And sometimes they were lit by candlelight. Is that right, Kim?
Yes, some of them were.
Yeah, or some just with electricity, but that slide would go in and then you would see that through and it'd be projected on a screen or on a wall. And it's really cool that these slides that were basically animated by having a little crank and having it be in motion. So I wanted to show that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And Chris, great. I think the question we have to wrap it up is,
for sure.
The attendee is asking, they're aware there's more than 7 million objects and artifacts, but if you had to pick a favorite, what would it be, Chris?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know, Kim, do you want to answer that also?
Yeah, it's so hard to answer, but I think if I was forced to choose one, I really am fond of the wall fragments that were from the detention hospital here in Victoria. So in the 1920s, there was a hospital where Chinese migrants could be detained and held. And some migrants who were in that room chiseled poems onto the wall to talk about their distress and concern. And these wall fragments were rescued by Dr. David Lai in the 70s. And they're just a beautiful example of that humanity and attitudes at that time that weren't beautiful. And we've used those fragments in a couple of exhibits and also in an outreach box. So I think there's a really
speaking of outreach kits, that's another one. Since you said human history, maybe I'll go with natural history. And just 2 floors down from us or 3 floors down from where I am right now, there's the birds collection. And in the birds collection, there are 4 passenger pigeons, which are extinct. There's something about that, just having this bird that's extinct with this really interesting history, and the fact that the collections are invaluable, and that they're not coming back. So it's only because of collections with things like that, extinct animals, that they're part of the collection. We could look at that, study it, look at it closely, and it's just one of the ways in which what the collections, natural history collections, are really important, both to understand where we've been, but also where we're going to. And just anytime I get to see those passenger pigeons, I just am in awe of the fact that these things were around and then they're not anymore. So
it's such a thanks, Chris. Those are great examples, and really about too how the museum is a time machine and is so important, because you never could go back to see them now, to see those passenger pigeons, or to get a sense of what somebody in that hospital in 1920 was feeling without those fragments and those resources being kept. So thank you for this
and
tour.
Also, and I would just say, Kim, that we're also like, we do some of that work within the museum, but most of the work is done with communities, whether that's natural history groups or whether that's community groups in terms of human history. It's working and working alongside the expertise around the province is really important. And the museum is a place of sharing that wonder and that curiosity, but also building that knowledge together collectively. And that's when museums can be really exciting and vital.
I'm so glad you said that. Thanks, Chris. Chris, if you'll stay here, I'm just going to stop the recording and we'll end Facebook, but there might be a few more questions here from the group that's gathered. Thanks everyone for joining us on this Family Day, and take care of yourselves.
Happy Family Day.
Happy Family Day. Bye-bye. Oh, it's not that.